Chapter 27. My story is such a sad one. On Monday, 10 days after Hurricane Susan, my school reopens. Halloween has come and gone, but I don't think anyone noticed. Uncle Weldon arrives at my house at the usual time. I'm waiting for him on the front porch, only now I am alone. This is because my father let rain outside without her caller during a superstorm. The air is cool and the morning is sunny. As soon as I see my uncle's truck, I run across our yard to the temporary bridge and walk very carefully along the planks. I don't want to fall into the stream below. Even now, there isn't as much water down there. Parked in the road in front of our house is an old yellow car my father borrowed from Sam Diamond. He has to leave it in the street since we can't drive over our temporary plank bridge, but at least we aren't stuck on our property anymore. I climb into Uncle Weldon's truck, and as soon as I've closed the door, I announce, "Praise, praise, praise." Uncle Weldon smiles at me. "Excellent. Was there room for that on your list?" "Yes," I say. "There was room." "Any word from the shelters?" I shake my head. No word. "Are you nervous about going back to school?" I think for a moment. Yes, I am nervous. My father drove me by my school yesterday so I could see it, and it looked fine, but I'm still nervous. What are you nervous about? I shake my head. I don't know. Mrs. Liebler walks me to Mrs. Cushell's room, and I see my desk. It looks like it did before Hurricane Susan. So does the rest of the room. Mrs. Liebler sits in her chair. I sit in mine. I begin to feel calmer. The bell rings and Mrs. Cushell stands at the front of the room and smiles at us. "Hello, class," she says. "I'm glad to see you here, and I'm glad to be here with you. The last week or so has been pretty crazy, but now it's time to get back to work. Before we do that, though, I think some of you might want to talk about your experiences during the storm." I can't help myself. I leap out of my chair and say, "We can't start yet, Miss Cushell. Anders and Leonore aren't here." Mrs. Liebler puts me back into my seat and gives me a look that is most likely a warning look. "I was just getting to that, Rose," says Mrs. Cushell. "I'm sorry to say that Anders and Leonora won't be here in our class any longer. Their families had to move." Flo raises her hand and says, "Their houses washed away?" "Are they okay?" asks Pervani. Her voice shakes a little. "I mean, are Anders and Leonora okay?" "They're fine," Mrs. Cushell replies. "Promise. Their families have left to live with their relatives." "Could we write them?" asks Pervani. "That's a wonderful idea," says Mrs. Cushell. "We'll write letters to Anders and Leonora this afternoon. Now, who would like to talk about their experiences?" One by one, my classmates talk about the last week and a half. "My sister broke her arm," says Morgan. "She fell downstairs when the lights went out." "I wanted to go trick-or-treating," says Martin, "but my parents said Halloween was canceled." "We have to live on the second floor of our house until all of the mud gets cleaned out of the first floor," says Flo. "Our house stinks." Mrs. Cushell turns to me. "Rose, would you like to tell us anything? How did Hurricane Susan affect you?" "Two trees fell in our yard, a birch and an elm. An oak tree split in half and the elm tree snapped over. Our bridge washed away, and my father let rain outside during the storm without her caller, and she didn't come back." Pervani gasps. She cranes her neck to look at me and says, "Rain is missing?" Her voice is small. "Yes," I reply. "She's been gone since the storm?" asks Josh. I see Mrs. Cushell and Mrs. Liebler glance at each other. Mrs. Kushel raises her eyebrows and Mrs. Liebler shrugs her shoulders. It is some kind of conversation. That is such a sad story, Morgan exclaims. Yes, it is, I say. Then I add, I've devised a search plan. I tell my classmates about the map and the circles and the list. Also, my uncle puts an ad in the paper. I like it when Rain came to school, says Josh. She's the best dog ever, adds Flo. Rose, I hope you find Rain, says Pravani. Now her voice is trembling. She looks at me for a long time. She looks at me for so long that I have to turn my eyes away. Mrs. Kushel touches Pravani's shoulder. What would you like to share? She asks gently. Pravani begins to cry. My mom is an artist, she tells us. She stored her paintings in a warehouse, and the warehouse flooded, and she lost all her work. Everything she's painted for 15 years. I stare at Pravani. I didn't know her mother was an artist. That is very sad. Tears make wet marks down Pravani's cheeks. The room grows quiet. Pravani, says Mrs. Kushel. She kneels beside her. Pravani gulps air. Do you need to step into the hall? I ask her. Rose, Mrs. Liebler starts to say. But Pravani gets to her feet. Yes, she replies, gulping and sobbing, wiping her face with her sleeve. Pravani winds her way through the desk to the door. I'll go with her, I tell Mrs. Liebler, and I follow Pravani into the hall. Pravani leans her forehead against the wall. I realize I should say something that will comfort her. Pravani, I thought of a new homonym this morning. A triple. Praise, praise, praise. Isn't that good? Pravani sniffs and nods her head. Thank you, Rose.